So it is 9:30 at Pacific time, and so you've just joined our wonderful panel. We hope to have some very great and lively discussion with our panelists. The title of our panel is The New Activism, Continuity and Change in Social Movements. It's actually a very interesting topic because in our new normal, we can't just say that it's about COVID. Well, it is about COVID, but it's also about the fact that we are seeing people taking to the streets. And so that's also part of the new normal. So I think it is important to actually talk about social movements during the time of COVID and this pandemic. And the activism is very broad and it's worldwide. And so we have some great panelists here. And by the way, I am Regina Tuma, Dr. Regina Tuma, and I am faculty here at in the media psychology program at Fielding. So I would like to I would like to turn it over to my colleague out in Salford, Dr. Sharon Cohen, who will introduce her panelists. And I just want to say that we also have our PhD student, Brooke Criswell, who will be handling the questions later on. Thank you. And I also thank Abby Ray, who is helping us with the tech in the background. So Dr. Cohen, my friend, take it over.
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy. It seems like sitting in a nice place with the best people I know. So I'm very happy to be here and to discuss this topic that I find extremely important and fascinating to the end. And for this end, I asked some friends of mine. One is Ben Bowman, I asked them to introduce themselves. And the reason why I asked that is that very often when you introduce people, you never say what they want you to say. So I prefer people to introduce themselves. So Ben Bowman, who is another academic from Manchester, although a different university, Lea Dohm, who is a clinical psychologist and is joining us from Germany, and Deborah Gibson, who is joining us, and she is an activist as well as a former academic who's joining us from Leeds, I believe now, or Harthill. And I asked each of them to speak for about 10 minutes, telling us about their experience in activism and how it changed. And then I prepared a series of questions that I would like to discuss with them after their introductions. So, Lea, you want to start, or Ben?
Ben, what do you think?
I can start if you like. That was what we discussed, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that's okay. Unless you really want to, Lea. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. My name's Dr. Ben Bowman. I'm from the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies, which is part of Manchester Metropolitan University, where I'm now a lecturer in sociology and criminology. I mean, it's a wonder to me how I ended up a criminologist, but I am in part. And I find this really a great opportunity. I'm grateful to be here. I'm also really disoriented and discombobulated by speaking into my camera. So what I'd like to do is just orient myself in the space here by telling you where I am. I'm in my kind of spare room up here in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is right on the edge of Manchester. Out my window that side, I can see Saddleworth Moor, which is a part of the Dark Peak area of the High Peaks district, and is a peat moor. We know it a lot from wildfires. So when it catches fire, the smoke comes here, we really smell it. So this is my my little talk to you about where we are, partly because I'm about to talk to you about some of my work. Right now, a lot of my work has been paused, but was with climate activists. So we were working with particularly climate strike activists at the school strikes for climate here in Manchester. When I say working, I mean we did, me and two colleagues undertook some analysis of protest signs, as well as interviews with young people who were we were really grateful to them for sparing their time. Before that work, I've worked with activists for Votes at 16 at the UK level and also at the European level. I've got a little bit of history working with activists, young activists in Russia as well. And so it's a topic I love to talk about. We had such an open question from Sharon about what to talk about. And what I wanted to do was bring you 3 discussion points really for young people as activists right now, as regards the media. So first I wanted to just kind of situate myself in this literature where young people are concerned and say, I really don't think it's right to consider young people digital natives. Quite often when talking about young people, people immediately think, and I'm not knocking it, it's just common to think, well, young people move very easily in online spaces, or that they're native to them, or that it's somehow natural that they can go online and do stuff, or on their phones and find things with an app. I think that the evidence we have is that that's at least limited, and that you have to put that in context of young people and what they actually do. I mean, a good example here is if you've ever been on the internet, it's really sexist. And so the assumption that young people can go online and just say what they want and do what they want and move freely, like it's just a natural space for them, is a very gendered notion. It's one that restricts a lot of young people. Not to belabor the point, but our empirical knowledge of the climate strike movement so far is that it's a very female movement and it's led by young women. Not that there aren't men in it too, but young women have a really important role to play. They tend to be at the center of things. And online spaces, are spaces where those inequalities that we've had since too long endure. So they find them tricky, just like the rest of us do. So yeah, for young people, I just wanted to kind of lay that out. I think we need to see them as equal young people, rather than starting from this assumption that I sometimes see, that they're digital. Here are my discussion points for you. Sorry, I hope I'm not rambling. First one, my impression, in my opinion, and my talking point for you about young activism is that discourses and framing are really important. And one thing that I kind of encounter in my work with young activists is that I feel like everybody talks as if they're a spokesperson. So whether they are really a spokesperson or whether they may be called to be a spokesperson or quoted out of context or whatever. In our research, one way that this comes about, so one way that this is manifest, and a good example for you, is how much work activists that we speak to have put into defining their action as nonviolent, as peaceful, or the work that they do in trying to frame their action as systemic action, so trying to take systemic change, or rooted in critiques of structural oppression. So in interviewing young people, as early as their early teens, we found them talking about this systemic oppression and trying to root their action as nonviolent. The reason I put this in the heading, discussion heading, as everyone is a spokesperson, is that at least here in the UK, if your action isn't expressly nonviolent, or if the police or a policymaker is able to define it as nonviolent, or say that there's a risk that it's not peaceful, they can whack you around the head with this stick. And actually, we have a recent history, certainly going back to 2010 and definitely before, of young people being really bearing the brunt of some nasty police behavior, and environmentalists too being subject to all sorts of really nasty abuse, surveillance, infiltration by secret police officers, and so forth. So when I hear those discussions, I hear young people trying to make sense of their work and trying to make sense of what they want to do, but also trying to fit into these discourses that may call out what they say and say, well, you didn't say you were peaceful, and so therefore, if you see what I mean. So I think kind of everyone's a spokesperson. They feel the weight and the burden of having to speak for themselves and their movement. The second one of the three is that I see and I perceive, and whether I'm right or wrong, young people working within really powerful categorizing frameworks and classifications. So, for instance, when talking to young people about environmentalism, there are an awful lot of young people that you will meet who will say, I'm not an environmentalist, even though the issues that they're concerned with are things like local pollution, climate change, environmental degradation, and stuff like that. One of the reasons for that is, I mean, in the environmental movement, there's a long history of mainstream environmentalism excluding and it's a US conference, so I can use US terminology, I hope, activism by people of color and environmental justice activism, and saying, well, you know, what you're talking about isn't really environmentalism, because what we're looking for is these particular technical changes to the economic system, rather than an overall uprooting of the status quo. In those, I know I'm talking about this, I hope it's coming across. Do you know what? Sharon, thank you for nodding. When I'm in class, the first thing I do is I look for someone nodding, and I tend to speak to the nodder. So I'm speaking to Sharon over here. When I see these frameworks binding young people, I think they can be really restrictive of young people. But I think that it's important to point out that a lot of young activists are not justice-oriented and are not progress-oriented in the way that I would describe them, but are far-right activists or are activists who are looking to react to social progress. And quite often these categories allow them opportunities to exploit different discursive frameworks or different activist works for their own gain. One example, and I know that people will support Extinction Rebellion, and I'm not saying we have to rubbish everything that they do, but a lot of the discussions and a lot of the work that Extinction Rebellion as a central organization has done has really chimed in with far-right talking points like depicting migration as a crisis, and that these allow an inlet for young far-right activists and others to say, well, actually, we have an environmentalist cause here and we share something with green movements. So we have these frameworks, I think, and they restrict young people, and they sometimes allow young people to adopt them and adapt to them. The last one I've got for you, the third one, is that language, because I know we're talking about psychology, it made me think a lot about the language people use, is really complicated. And I see language being a way that people express their meaning. So they'll say, you know, what I want to do is achieve these targets, or these are the kind of policies I'd like to see. They also see it as a tool that young people use to navigate different relationships. Now, I know that we'll probably discuss language, but I just wanted to give you my idea of it before I log off, and then the next person comes on. I think young people have a really precarious life. They don't know what's going to happen. Constance Flanagan talked about young people having two forms of discussion about their future: expressing hope in public. This is the kind of way that you would say, well, if I work hard and I stay in school, everything's going to be okay, and I'm going to be really happy and successful. While at the same time, they'll also express a private anxiety. So they'll talk about how in their private life, their real personal experiences, it's not how hard you work, it's who you know. Staying in school isn't enough because you can graduate and not find a job. They express public hopes, and they feel private anxiety. So they feel in their private life that things are different. To me, this fits in with the kind of approach that Sarah Pickard talks about young activism, or James Sloan with his idea of toolboxes, that young people don't have political things that they do, like older generations, they have a particular kind of toolbox approach to politics, and that they'll reach out and grab them. So I think that expressing hope and saying we can achieve that is a tool that young people will reach out and grab when it's useful. And I think that when we're talking about the use of language, let's say online, the way that young people will share a particular topic or engage in a discussion or share a meme or start talking about the latest TV series, which is an example of the sort of thing they're working towards. I think there's something we need to think about there, about the ways that those tools can be grasped by young people as they try to navigate what is really a precarious and difficult situation for them. And yeah, so those are my 3 talking points for you. Everyone's a spokesperson. Everyone's in these weird categorizations. And finally, I've titled it Games We Play. The young people that I've spoken to have really difficult, precarious lives. They're trying to navigate them, and they reach out and they pick up on discourse and they pick up on language to use when it can help them navigate it. And that's what I've got. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you. Brilliant talking points. And the questions I see are starting coming already, so I'm quite excited, as usual. Lea, I will give you the floor now, and then Deb. Is that okay? Lea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very excited because I'm not a native speaker. I hope you can understand me. So I prepared a little speech. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Lea Dohm. I'm one of the founders of Psychologists and Psychotherapists for Future Germany. I'm a psychologist, a psychodynamic psychotherapist, and at work in my own practice near Hanover. I would like to give you a 10 minutes overview about Psychologists for Future, what we do and why. Also, I'm here to ask for your help. So, climate crisis is real. According to our best scientists, we are facing a planetary emergency. This emergency is threatening human existence as a species. Our climate has so-called interconnected tipping points, like the Amazon rainforest affected by serious droughts, melting Arctic sea ice, and thawing permafrost in Russia. Triggering tipping points will lead to sudden, irreversible change of our climate system. This is happening right now. Climate crisis is not stopped or at least slowed down by lower emissions due to the corona pandemic. In fact, we are in a multi-crisis. It would seem like the pandemic is a test of our government's abilities to act in face of crises. More and more people in my country start to feel how climate change is already impacting us today. Here in Germany, we are repeatedly facing extremely hot summers right now at this moment, increasing risk of forest fires, extreme droughts, and low harvests. Big areas of our old forests are dying. But more than us, it's people from the global south who already today are starving and their environment is destroyed. Here in Europe, we are confronted with millions of climate refugees and the growing of xenophobia, nationalism, and political right-wing populism. So the climate crisis is a matter of justice. People with the biggest climate impact should also be the ones fighting it the most right now. It was 2008 when psychologists from the American Psychological Association, APA, founded a task force to underline the psychological dimensions of climate change. On the one hand, they found huge empirical evidence for multiple impacts on mental health due to the global warming. And on the other hand, they are describing social impacts like increasing aggression, political conflict, and even wars. They are showing us who in our communities are and will be suffering most: women, children, and minorities. All these psychological topics connected to climate crisis led to the founding of Psychologists, Psychotherapists for Future. To shorten our name, we use the initials Psy4F. Psychologists for Future was founded in April 2019 by my colleague Mareike Schulze and me, when climate protests began to spread around the world. We both are young mothers concerned about the future of our children. Mareike and me, we got in contact via Facebook, where we shared our experience of climate anxiety and our ideas about the role of psychology. That is how our climate activist life started. Our main question was, with a scientific consensus of 99%, why is this existential threat present so little in media and in public consciousness? On May 21st, 2019, 3 days before the European election, we published a statement with 100 signatures on our new website. It had been so much work, the release felt like a party. Our statement is available in English too. You will find it on our website, psychologistforfuture.org. There are 4 main points in our statement. 1, denial of climate crisis is a psychological problem. 2, awareness of the climate crisis can be a psychological problem too. 3, as psychologists and psychotherapists, we know how to raise awareness and the motivation of behavior change. And 4, there will be effects of changing weather, especially extreme weather events, to mental health. We are sure our psychological knowledge will be needed in politics. Our knowledge will be needed to act in face of climate crisis and right-wing populism. Our knowledge needs to be more present in public discussion and problem solving. Today, we are working with psychological colleagues from all areas, researchers, environmental and social psychologists, political, media and communication psychologists, psychotherapists, and many others. We try taking our knowledge into the public with our press team and our social media team. We deliver speeches, workshops, and online seminars. We offer conflict management and free counseling for climate activists, join the protest, and keep contact to our professional institutions. All in all, we mobilize. Psy4F joins the worldwide climate movement. We support and underline the demands for more urgent and consistent action and for a fundamental political and social paradigm shift regarding climate. The goals set by the Paris Agreement must be met. We honor our personal and professional responsibility and wish to increase pressure on the decision makers and motivate them towards more climate action. As psychologists, we know how to implement behavior changes, but we also know how difficult this can be. So it has to be another part of our work to increase trust in climate political action and working against social division. We personally try to give good examples to others, talk about the climate and our environmental crisis in our communities, and by doing so, try to overcome the bystander effect. There are more and more colleagues interested in joining us. We are still growing. Today, we are more than 530 colleagues volunteering in Germany. We are organized in regional and working groups. We built up a coordination team with 6 colleagues, a delegate council, and developed a mission statement. We share our knowledge with the founders of the Psychologists for Future in Austria, Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Ireland, and Italy. Psychologists for Future is a social media movement as well. From the very beginning, our social media and press teams were 2 of the biggest and most important groups in our movement. You can find us at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube with all in all more than 10,000 followers. In social media, we try to share useful psychological knowledge. More and more, we also feel secure enough to give our comments to daily politics. Our mission statement offers a framework for all our communications. For example, we are a non-party and non-institutional group. Our mission statement also gives us direction for our postings. We want to respect people's autonomy, prevent harm from people, animals, and nature, improve mental health, dignity, and human rights, and see us, the human species, as a part of nature. We are against any form of anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, and other forms of minority discrimination. A few weeks ago, we also supported the Black Lives Matter movement. We use and spread the knowledge of climate communication. As psychologists and psychotherapists, there is so much essential knowledge that we can bring in. That is why I'm speaking to you today. Not only as an environmental psychologist, it is part of our job to take care of our planet. It is our duty as human beings. Climate crisis has to be part of our personal agenda for all of us. To keep healthy and happy lives for us, our children and grandchildren, we need a system change. We need to leave behind the fairy tale of endless economic growth and free us from fossil fuel industries. This is an unbelievably big quest, and according to scientists, we may have only but 7 to 8 years to fix this. So just feel free to think about what your part will be. What are your interests, skills, and talents? Please find some time to use them for climate action. So let's start today. Let's go out and stretch our comfort zones, like me speaking English today. We need to be effectful and impactful. We need action, and we need to start now. Feel free to contact us via mail at psychologistforfuture.org, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Lea. Lea, you rocked it. Very well done. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. And the last speaker, I can't see her on my screen, but I'm sure she's here, is Deborah Gibson. We met actually on the anti-fracking, in the context of the anti-fracking movement, and she's a fantastic psychotherapist as well as a former academic in Leeds. And I would like to give
Is she
her...
on, Sharon? I think we've lost her.
Matt, can I say, I see her listed in the attendees rather than in the panelists. Do the organizers need to switch her over?
I think I can do that. Where is she? Deborah Gibson.
Yep.
Promote to panelist. That's what I'm doing.
There she is. Deborah?
Am I on yet?
You are?
Yes, you are. It's your time.
Yay. Okay. I actually have a present to put it up. Can you sort of share this? Can I share the screen?
I think so.
Yes, yeah. You need to just go to the green button.
Share screen, yeah. Can you see that?
No.
I think the video's off.
Okay. Oh dear, now I don't know what I'm doing.
Start your video and then share your screen.
Let me just see if I can do this. If not, I'll talk.
I think we're having issues with the connection. Is that my
really?
I'm having issues hearing. Is that me?
Right. Can you see anything there?
No, we see nothing actually. We only see your name.
So,
do you want to try talking instead?
Though I think we're having issues with her audio as well.
Oh.
So, do we want to continue, and then we can let Deb sort of jump on? when it's all fixed for her.
Okay. So someone will fix that in
We're
the
hoping.
meantime?
We're hoping.
Cool. I can hear her.
I think there's a bad internet connection, as would happen in this virtual symposium, and our apologies. The internet gods really own us here.
It's working, she says, in Nashville. Nashville rocks.
Can you hear me yet? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see your screen or anything.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you just talk us through it? I know that you're the art person, so it's a bit of a...
Okay. Never mind.
Well,
let me see if I can. Okay, images for you. I was going to run through a campaign, basically. A campaign. Yeah, it doesn't when you can't see anything because I've got it. A campaign. As she said, I can talk you through it.
Yes.
I don't think this is going to work. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, shall I just talk very, very briefly? Because without an image, it's going to be... Can you still hear me?
Oh, there you go!
I'll just go through some of the points that Have you got me?
yes.
Have you got an image?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good. Good.
But the audio is cutting in and out.
Okay. I don't think then I can share. I don't think. Okay. If it's not actually going to be very good for people to listen to, then entirely. Because if the technology is going to be a problem, then there's not much I can do at my end, I'm afraid.
Don't worry about it. Just tell us who you are and what you do, and then we can just discuss.
Okay.
Okay.
It's frozen.
Okay. Well, I'm a very, very recently retired art psychotherapist. Well, I'm a very, very recently retired. There's not much I can do, I'm afraid, at this end. Just
We have
just drop me out of it.
Switch off the camera and only send the microphone, and it might work better. Thank you. We got lies online. I can read it.
Yes, turn your video off, they're saying. Do we want to?
Oh dear. There's not much I can do, I'm afraid, at this psychotherapist.
No.
Very recently retired.
I'm so sorry, Debs. You know what we do?
I can't hear. I can't.
Debs, I'm so sorry. We cannot hear you. So what I'll ask you to do is to record like a 10 minutes intervention that we can upload later on. I've seen it done in another panel. But unfortunately, we cannot just wait. I'm so sorry to waste your time. But Ben says that there is a phone number to call to speak in if someone can.
Maybe Alma or Abby can do that. Yeah.
If it was possible, maybe with Deborah's permission, maybe we could keep going and then when she's connected, we can bring her into this.
Yeah. Yeah, also because I cannot see the watch, but I think
Yeah, we have,
don't
yeah.
have much time.
Okay, so we're going to extend the discussion till about, I think 10:20. So let's do that.
Until 20, so that's
Yes.
15 minutes.
Yes.
Would you agree? Because I see there are quite a lot of comments, and I do have my questions, but for me it's more important to listen to the people and the questions that actually the audience has. So would it be okay if we start from the public's questions, and then if there is time, I'll ask my questions? I've seen that some of them anyway, you know, great minds alike, are very similar to my questions, so it wouldn't make sense. Would that be okay, Brooke?
That is fine by me.
Cool.
Okay, so the first question I have is, how do we as activists merge technology and our activism during a time when lockdowns in public safety is priority?
Lea, you're an activist at the moment. Would you like to speak to this question?
Who, me or Lea? Lea.
We use Signal as a messenger. We are spread all over Germany. So for us, it's like normal to communicate via messenger. So it's not that big difference in the pandemic at all. Some of us took the time to just slow down and get some rest. But all in all, we continued our work like before.
Very good. Ben?
This question made me think, I know it's not the same topic, but it made me think of work like Johnny Martinez Palacios' work on the 15M movement in Spain, where she wrote about how that movement built grassroots democratic decision-making bodies. And then when they actually got it running, the people who spoke were all men. And one of the things that I thought about here is the way that that even though a lot of activism is moving online, those inequalities are enduring and they're durable. So some of the things that we can do online are the same things that we should be doing offline. For instance, making sure that people have time to consider what they're writing before they write it, or is always useful. Championing people who might not feel confident to speak and stuff like that. One of the other things that I thought is that being online can be really alienating. I feel really isolated right now. And so for activists moving online, I had a couple of suggestions. I mean, I'm kind of imagining that this questioner has an interest in activism to ask it. One of them would be to keep records of what's going on. And to keep records specifically so that you can share victories and track progress. So one thing that can be done is, for instance, in a campaign that's pushing MPs here in the UK, so like politicians, it would be useful to keep a list of all the MPs you are contacting and a constant track of how they were wavering, were they coming into support, and blah, blah, blah. Partly so that you can write to the people in the movement and say, do you know what? I know it's a difficult time right now, but here's some good news. Here's our newsletter, and here's some of the progress that we're making. The last thing, I guess, that made me think was ways to share that space, not just for activist work, but just for talking. And in teaching, one thing that we found really useful is just giving the first 5 minutes and letting students vent is really useful. And it made me think of how difficult it must be to be doing political work, and how useful it must be just to have a space where people say, do you know what? Just tell us how you feel. Let's just let it all out. And then we'll get on to work in like 5 or 10 minutes. So that's what I thought. Yeah. So
I have a follow-up to that, if I may. So are you saying, Ben and Lea, that your activities have definitely changed during the pandemic, but it's more focused on not in terms of being out in the streets, but in terms of reaching out to politicians, writing letters, things like that? Because the issue would be are you at all with these activities trying to maintain visibility? Visibility is crucial to all social movements. So how are you navigating visibility online?
We use our social media platforms and we do a lot of press work. And in Germany, the media is more and more interested in us. It's like the second biggest TV station who made an interview with us last week. And today we are in a very big newspaper. It's incredible. So it's still working through the pandemic.
One very big campaign right now here in Manchester is a campaign against the installation of police officers in schools. So it's a local campaign by the powers that be to expand the placement of police officers in schools, which a lot of people have opposed for the reasons that you can probably imagine, and which is something connected to the ongoing global movement that is known often as Black Lives Matter, about taking a mainstreaming, really, a critical race approach to thinking about things. And so, although some activism is online, some of it is very definitely offline and is very definitely in the streets. And some of it is also totally connected to offline stuff. One thing, because I work in young people's stuff, is about the reopening of schools. Are young people being considered in it? Reforms like placing police officers in schools are the sorts of things that can only really be done with an offline component, because it's real life stuff. If you've got a real police officer, you can't just tweet about him. He's like really there. So this is about gathering people. So I suppose I would say one of the things that is alive in people's minds is what's the best practice. So what's the best way to protect and safeguard people and look after them and keep them healthy, and also deal with all the other threats to their life, because it's a really difficult and dangerous life that a lot of people lead. And a lot of people have a lot of things that go around that can hurt them. In the US, one thing you're familiar with is police violence, police brutality, which happens here too. That doesn't go away just because there's coronavirus. And so some people will be thinking, well, you know, I am in danger all the time. So I need to take action. So for activists, it's often about saying, what's the best we can do, or how can we accommodate the need to be on the street with other new kind of salient concerns about our health in a pandemic. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
We have kind of a follow-up question for Ben with that is, do you think that the language that young people have of public hope with private anxiety is a good or bad thing, and why?
So Constance Flanagan uses this terminology to talk about, I mean, the technical term for it is kind of growing up in neoliberal hegemony. And I can give you an example of it, because the obvious example is the expressing in public the hope that you'll work hard and succeed, you know, because that's what everybody has to say when they go to a job interview. But the private anxiety is, I've done 20 job interviews and they always don't give me a job, and I know this stuff, so what's going on, you know? So that juxtaposition, or that dissonance between the privately held and privately expressed everyday experience and the publicly expressed kind of neoliberal attitude that if I work hard, I'm going to succeed. The thing that this question made me think of was a focus group I did with a group of young people here in England, where the group were talking very, very nastily about single mothers and young mothers, and saying, and I'm sorry, it's a hurtful thing to say, but I can reproduce it for you, that they were basically having children in order to get benefits, you know, government support. But at the same time, in the class were several single mothers. This was in a vocational college. There were several mothers who lived alone with their children, and they had had a conversation among themselves about how it was impossible to get housing, and many of them were living with their parents. And so in the group, they had to resolve that tension, that they were reproducing that public expression of I mean, I called it hope and Flanagan called it hope, but it's not always hopeful, that if you work hard, you're going to succeed. And if you don't succeed, it's because you didn't work hard enough. Or if you're relying on other people's support, it's because you're a moral failure. With that kind of privately expressed, oftentimes, personal experience that the world doesn't work like that, and people are precarious. My response here is that I think it's good that young people feel anxiety because it's the truth. And I mean, honesty is important. You got to speak the truth. We have a climate activist here. How do we deal with climate change if we are always hopeful about it? It's terrible. Like, it's really bad. we should be anxious about it. And one of the things that I think is important is bringing the truth into those discussions, because we often lose it. Good example, the declaration that migration is a crisis, or that it's bad, as a public discourse, a public discussion. When in people's private lives, they'll say, oh, you know, I got no problem. My mate down the road moved here from blah, 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 and we're all fine. It's the country in general that has a problem, or it's society in general has a problem. So I think sometimes that kind of tension is one that can be resolved. Yeah.
In our counseling, we say that climate anxiety is like a U. So too little is bad and too much is bad too.
I agree. And this is very interesting because linking it to the pandemic, all these issues of anxiety, this issue of bringing together groups that see things very differently, I think works in a different way in a face-to-face interaction as opposed to an online interaction. So when, as a result of the pandemic, many people decided that they weren't ready to go out in the streets, they weren't ready to confront others, then you see groups of people forming around particular opinions. So like in psychology, some years ago in social psychology, we were talking about opinion-based groups. Yeah, so groups based around or an opinion. And there is literature in media psychology or in social psychology about the emergence of groups based on their interaction online and their sharing a particular vision of the world online. And one of my hypotheses, I have no data as of now, but is my hypothesis is that due to the pandemic and the fact that many of us, it's certainly my personal experience, that I'm stuck at home, I cannot go out, I cannot scream, so I get more angry because I feel like I'm in a pressure cook. Lea.
I'm pronounced with an E, Lea, but it's okay, it's no problem. I think maybe because of the pandemic, we see a shift of values, more to like nurses and healthcare gets a little bit more important. Also, here in Germany, it's often women who are working in the supermarket who get a little value shift towards their jobs. So that might be good because we need women's rights getting bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that might be an advantage.
So I want to say it's quite interesting. I think I said this at a conversation hour yesterday, because to a certain extent, the pandemic is almost like a canvas that has allowed us to see all the injustices and the vulnerability. It's as if an artist took it and put it on there, right? And so we're seeing it. It's almost like we're looking at this. And so we are seeing, how little we value health workers, how we are seeing racism, we are seeing, and then paradoxically, people taking to the streets, and you mentioned the pressure cooker, Sharon, right? So that there's just that effervescence, right? Durkheim used to talk about social movements and a sort of effervescence, right, that is happening. And so that effervescence is a motivation, and we know that what happens online does not stay online. It's got to be in the streets as well. I mean, there is a relationship. And so it's just quite interesting, but I think that there is something reflective here that is happening with this pandemic.
Ben, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, when talking about that, Lea talked about how governments are distrusted. And I think that must put you in a really tough position, Lea, and your organization is in a difficult position because I think governments are distrusted in their responses to the climate crisis, but also in the work of movements like Black Lives Matter that point out how over decades, centuries, the kind of systemic inequalities and injustices and damage has been continued by governments. And there's really no adequate response to them, at least not yet. I mean, we get a little badge on a Premier League footballer's jacket and a shirt and, like a talk, a phrase, but we're not seeing a lot of real action. But at the same time, activist groups are often looking for policy changes on behalf of government. So working within those institutional frameworks and working within those like within Parliament and within lobby groups and stuff like that, what you're looking to do is take action through those distrusted groups. And if you're going to take it, then do you trust them to impose it? Do you see what I mean? I think it must put you in a bit of a conceptual bind. Yeah.
I think Germany is not that much splitted in left and right like other countries, but we still have this problem too, of course. And but we try to find a way through it, like water through stones. But it's difficult, and it's one decision after another.
It must be really tricky. It made me think of Bill McKibben was interviewed on the New Yorker Radio Hour just last week, and he said that the climate movement had he found out too late, had won the argument, but not the fight, and that it wasn't an argument about getting across a rational feeling or evidence and logic. It was about fight, and that fight came down to power and money, and that was what the fossil fuel industry had. So I hope that as well as expressing these kind of logical arguments, that we're seeing a growing power among activist movements, not just environmental ones, but justice-oriented ones.
And I think, we've seen it today. One thing that we often forget as media psychologists is that not everybody has access to the internet. When Regina was talking about the fact that the pandemic is a canvas, well, this session is a canvas. Yeah, we had a speaker who, because their internet connection wasn't quick enough, wasn't set enough, etc., wasn't supported into getting her word and her knowledge to us. And it was prevented not by lack of will or lack of interest or lack of engagement, but by lack of access to a quick internet or whatever technical stuff didn't go right. So what I learned from this pandemic, because I was lucky enough to be left without internet for a week during the pandemic, is that we need to remember all that we've studied. I mean, media psychologists will know about the digital divide and how this is another aspect of inequality that means that although there are big fights and etc., we tend to believe sometimes that the virtual world is the world, Yeah, especially when you're locked in a house and you got nothing but the internet. But actually, we're forgetting that there are at least, you know, a good percentage of people who still don't have, even in the US, there is even, if I remember, there is not 100% penetration of the internet. In the US, there isn't definitely in the UK. I don't remember the stats. I used them in a lecture, I forgot. But so the digital divide becomes even more an issue for a democratic society when we find ourselves in a situation such as the current one, which brings to the other. No, I said no question first, the people's question. So sorry, I shut up. Brooke, thank you.
No worries. We just have one other one currently, and then we can probably take it back to open discussion. But this one is, do you think that COVID-19 is a big factor to the growth of activism movements getting that attention now because there is shared global empathy? And this person means on a psychological standpoint that globally people are more internally connected from all being on lockdown and basically dealing with the PTSD from the fear of dying from the virus.
Okay.
I think perhaps COVID-19 gives us a sense of a meaning of nature, which is not under our control. And that might be a connection to climate crisis. But we should be very careful to connect both, because they're very different, and we can make a lot of mistakes by connecting to apple and oranges.
Absolutely.
And after all, it's a tragedy. COVID-19 is a tragedy, I think. And I have little difficulties to say, it might be very good for the movement or blah, blah, because after all, people are dying.
There's also a lot of division, and a lot of that division matches up with what people have experienced before. And I'm thinking here about like mask wearing, that so I saw a meme going around, which was a picture of somebody with a mask from the television program Handmaid's Tale, with a little quote from the book, which Margaret Atwood spoke about directly and said, no, this isn't a dystopia. But her work was being drawn upon to say we were living in a dystopic civilization and that we should resist wearing masks. And then, so if there are those divisions between groups that are pulling on different discourses to say, well, you can see that this is exactly what's happening, it's just like that book, you know, and others who are saying, well, you're misusing that cultural meeting point. So there are also other things going on that still divide those groups. So for one thing, a lot of people, and particularly women, and particularly people from other marginalized groups, and you know, they intersect. So there's an intersectional framework that needs to be taken. But basically, people who are marginalized have all sorts of bad experiences. If you go to a health professional, so if you've been to a doctor and a doctor has given you terrible advice on breastfeeding, then later in life you're going to look at advice from healthcare professionals and think twice. Or if you've been in childbirth, for instance, and you're a woman who's racialized as Black in the UK, you're so far more likely to die in childbirth than somebody from a racialized white community. You may look at those health systems and not see them with a whole lot of trust. And frankly, I think that anxiety would be well-founded and right. So then if we have all these different discourses being negotiated, some of which say, this health system is out to get you, and really they're going to try and put a mask on you because we're living in an emerging dystopian society. A lot of people will see that and say, well, maybe these are my people, because I've often felt that I couldn't really trust the doctor, and I've often had bad advice from doctors, and people have told me, well, it doesn't come up on their radar. Finally, somebody is saying it, maybe they've got a point. Maybe they're speaking to people like me. So I think that there are really complex divisions going on, and that a lot of them have deep roots. Yeah, really deep roots. Yeah, often we're talking about media psychology. I think a lot of it comes through to trust. Yeah, trusting.
Yeah, but going back to the key question, to the question that was asked before, and I found it quite interesting about empathy. I don't know if you guys know Stephen Reicher. Me and pronunciation, forget about it. But like, he's a big social psychologist, and he keeps struggling with the tendency that you can observe in some of the mainstream media, and that is echoed in some of the discourses online about, oh, look at these people, they're not observing the rules, they're not wearing the masks, or at the time they're not keeping lockdown or whatever. And the actual evidence that, at least in the UK, the vast majority of people actually were very mindful and observant of what the WHO guidelines, what the main guidelines, health guidelines were. And the argument there, same is with empathy. Yeah. So when it comes to for example, the reaction, both online and offline, to the event of the crisis, media, mainstream media I'm talking, might want to focus on the few exceptions in which, people are rule breakers. But actually, if you look at it, it brought together communities. I know there was like a rise of Facebook accounts or WhatsApp groups, people organizing within their road, people offering mutual support groups, solidarity. And I know for personal experience, again, I know this is not good science, but it's a starting point. You always start from observation. And what I observed was that, for example, in my case, in my local area, that from a local Facebook group that was there in general, it grew. People started interacting a lot more there, sharing, supporting each other. And then with the Black Lives Matter movement, etc., they created a separate account. Actually, I was meant to have someone from that group too, but technicalities and stuff. And that's called Residents for Change. So from a local community organized, local community group that blew up during the pandemic, the birth of new groups of mutual support, and the birth of political engagement and political.
Yeah, I want to jump in because there was something that Lea said earlier, and she said, if you look at climate change, 99% of scientists agree, and most people are understanding this, right? But you mentioned how we focus on the rule breakers, right? So more people are observing the mask requirements, right? We have a major problem in the United States. But you mentioned media, but what we see, and on social media reflected, are basically the memes of the people who are not wearing the masks, right? So we're seeing people in the United States at stores who are actually, fighting with employees when they're told you need to wear a mask. And so when we talk about what is being reflected back to us, and both in mainstream media and a lot of times in social media, though in social media, it can get reworked rather easily because then people start posting. But what we're seeing here too is the sort of vocal minority, right? When we think of social influence and minority influence, that is a vocal minority group that is very loud and is co-opting sort of the images. And so we get the sense that the society is like those rule breakers, that people are not wearing the mask, when in reality, right, more people are. Well, maybe not in the United States, because you see our infection rate has gone, it's nuts here. But yeah, I also think we have another question. But Lea, I think Lea raised her hand.
I want to underline what you said, Regina, because I think there is one study from the Columbia University and one from National Academy of Science, United States, who both said we could concentrate not on the deniers more than the people who are like in the middle, because otherwise we will give a lot of energy for not having a big impact.
We have to, if we're ever going to get this change that we need. And I think that Black Lives Matter and the going into the streets and the faces, the diversity of faces involved in that, right, really showed us, it provided us with a glimpse of what can be. And it was an amazing image for us to see. And I mentioned here in the United States, where our political situation and where we now have, whether we like it or not, we have Republicans who are turning away from Trump and forming a movement to elect the Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, right? So whether we like it or not, we're going to have to, Lea, reconstruct society along those lines. So if we are able, we need to move out of these entrenched sides. And that's why I thought Ben's comment of the young people saying, I'm not an environmentalist, and then they proceed to talk about these issues. It's fascinating. But I think we have a question, Brooke.
Yeah, from
Wait.
Sorry,
I think I muted you by accident. Go ahead.
That's okay. Okay. It's from Fielding's provost, Dr. Monique Snowden. She asked, can you tell me your thoughts on the phenomenon of mainstreaming of activism via media and the importance of scholarly works and actions that exemplify the power of radicalism?
Okay, we must be having problems with your audio. Ben, did you hear? Can
Yeah.
you read it?
Can you read the question again, Brooke?
It's in the chat.
Sure. So from Fielding's provost, Dr. Monique Snowden, she says, can you tell me your thoughts on the phenomenon of mainstreaming of activism via media and the importance of scholarly works and actions that exemplify the power of radicalism?
Okay, both Lea and Ben want to answer. Ben, you were first.
Okay, when I think of the word mainstreaming, and it may be because I'm from a different discipline, I'm a political scientist by training, I think of when I taught international relations that liberalism and realism were right through the whole course, and nobody said, well, why are we covering those? Because they're mainstream. I mean, you can't do IR without them. But then when I took over the course, critical theory was at the end in lecture 7. So feminist strategies for international relations, for instance, were popped in there. And so mainstreaming, I would see mainstreaming as the approach of saying, these aren't in lecture 7. We don't do those issues in the end. They're the core of it. And I think that where I see it, in my opinion, is that we've got a long way to go. So I'm thinking of, I used to live down south in southern England, and my local city was Bristol, where recently a statue of a slave trader called Edward Colston, notorious person, was recently pulled down by activists and dropped into the harbor, which was fantastic. And this was covered widely in the media as an event and as a happening. And you know, what will happen? Will they stick it in M-Shed, the local museum, and what will they do? But the situation there is that statue had been up. I mean, it was a relatively modern statue. It's a Victorian 1800s statue, put long after Colston was gone as a memorial to him. But people had been talking about it, working on it. There'd been statues put outside it for many, many years. Just a few years ago, there was a statue put up by guerrilla artists laying out bodies in a slave ship beneath him, and then with a list of the most commonly held positions by people in modern slavery in the UK, nail bar assistant, and stuff like that. And it said here and now. So we've had constant work to address that statute, to change the name of schools that are named after him and stuff like that. So the mainstreaming of activism through media really can't be the process of saying, well, we can kind of soothe the public, particularly white, guilt about these things because we've had this moment of change. It needs to really reflect how long that work has been going on and how long it has to go on. So I'm hesitant about mainstreaming because I think a lot of it is about seeking the headline when actually there's so much work and so much history that's gone into it and so much yet to be done.
Lea, you wanted to say something?
Yes, hopefully I understood the question right, but I think we need some mainstreaming. So maybe I might be a little different opinion than Ben. But I think that climate justice and all those questions connected to it has to become part of our personal agenda and our professional agenda, and at least at priority number 2. In our institutions, in our organizations, in our households, in our sports club, whatever, everywhere, and everyone from us. It needs to be everywhere. So that may be some mainstreaming. And I think it's not radical. I hope I pronounce it right. I think it's a matter of human and fundamental rights.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have it's 10:40. 10:42. So we've got 3 minutes if we want to get Deb in to say something, and then we have to conclude because we have another session.
Yeah,
Deb, 3 minutes. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's my apologies. I suspect it's at my end. Basically, while I was offline, I was kind of thinking my inability to engage in this is a prime example of the basic inequality of anything that we do online. It all depends on us having the equipment and the money to have the equipment, and then to actually live in a place where it's got some kind of decent connections. And so, here I am. It's sort of embodying that, really. So I'm unable to do my presentation, but just very, very briefly, what I wanted to show you was something about the evolution of a campaign. When Sharon invited me to take part in this, as you said, Ben, the brief was incredibly broad. So I decided to drop the academic aspect of me, because I've just retired and I want to leave it behind for a while, and really embrace the activist me. So I was going to go through a campaign through images. So what I'm going to try and do is do a voice recording over the images and get it to Sharon, and maybe somehow she can share it with you in some way. But basically, I'm trying to leave social media behind as much as I possibly can now, because I think partly it's not good for my mental health or anybody's mental health, because it's an echo chamber and continually is an echo chamber. And all it does basically is reiterate the same things to very like-minded people. So unless we're actually going to use the same tactics that governments are using, which is exactly another reason why I'm leaving social media as a campaign tool anyway, it's because it's been infiltrated. So unless we manage to infiltrate the opposition somehow and use the same kinds of tactics, I can't see social media as a future. I come from a very old-fashioned background, and I've probably reached that age where I have a great deal of perspective on activism across the whole of my 60-odd years. And the most informative part of that was Greenham, and we used to organise actions entirely without the benefit, dubious benefit of modern communications. We used to use telephone trees and conversation and face-to-face meetings, and even internationally, we had the same approach. So I do know that modern day social media isn't really that important. We need to think laterally, we need to think differently, we need to think smarter.
and talk to each other. I find this very uncomfortable medium, and because I can't see people properly, and a bit like you, Lea, you're saying that you come from a psychological background, and that's exactly where I come from, and it is about communication and engagement, and I can manage it in this kind of medium, but as far as organising something and actually doing something that might be anti-government or anti-authoritarian, because inevitably all campaigns become anti-government and anti-authoritarian. I think social media, we need to just be much, much smarter about that and use different forms of media. And because I'm an art psychotherapist, art all the way through.
So I want to jump in here because we have to unfortunately end it, but we're getting things in the chat like, thanks. Also, everyone has so much to share. Will we have contact information for follow-up? And I can follow up with Sharon to see if there's some kind of working group that we could, through fielding, connect to each other and maybe have a dedicated space where we continue this conversation, Ben and Lea, who first started off as Lea, but now she's Lea. She's a little bit like, yeah, exactly, like a rap star. So, Kanye changes his name. So, and Deb, we're definitely, if we could do a short video, and we will attach it to this video. And so maybe we can, if there's enough interest as psychologists, we can get this started with some of our students, some of our faculty interested. It will be beyond media psychology. We have other colleagues and other programs here at Fielding who would probably love to be part of this, and we could be a hub for this change and exchange of ideas, because I see that there's an interest, and some people have said that. So we will hopefully, this is not the first time we see each other. And hopefully we can continue. So I really want to thank Ben, Lea, Deb, and of course Sharon. Thank you so much for this panel, and let's keep it going. I will talk and see what we can set up so we have some kind of working group if there's an interest in that. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to our participants. Hope to see everyone soon. Thank you.